It is January 25th, and I have started reading some Savidge Prompt books. The first book that I started reading is actually the January 2024 Savidge Prompt book, because I was looking for books the other day for the Cat Lady Readathon, which is taking place in February of 2024, and I was looking for books with cats on the cover or cats in the story, and I picked up Future Home of the Living God by Louise Savidge. There's no cat on the cover of this one, but there is a snake, and the Savidge Prompt for January is a book with a snake on the cover. I don't think I have any other books with snakes on the cover. I didn't look for any other books. This just felt right. I've never read a Louise Savidge before, so I was super excited to pick this one up. I also kind of randomly started reading The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, and this fits perfectly for the November 2023 prompt for Savidge Prompts, which is read a book that's been on your shelves forever. This book is on my pre-2022 TBR, so in 2022 I started logging all the books that came into the house, and this one was one that I had prior to that. I think it only came in like 2021 or 2020 though, so it hasn't been on my shelf forever, but it's been on my shelf like a decently long amount of time. Before I go on to talk about these two books and where I am in them, let's talk about the Savidge Prompts. So the Savidge Prompts is a year-long reading challenge put on by Simon Savidge and Louise Savidge Muses, who are mother and son, and they pick 12 prompts, or sometimes 13 prompts, out of a jar, and all these prompts were suggested by viewers on their booktube channels or by people on their Instagram, etc., etc. So they pick 12 prompts per year. I've done vlogs for every Savidge Prompt book that I've read up until November of 2023. So I kind of fell off with reading the prompts. I don't read them in the month that the prompt is for. I just read them throughout the year. And usually I'll do 2 or 3 books per vlog. And in November 2023, I kind of got stumped of what book I wanted to read as a book that's been on my TBR forever. I also haven't read the December 2023 prompt, which is a book with weather words in the title. And I also haven't read the bonus prompt for 2023, which was a book with a mother-son relationship. I was excited that they were going to do this again in 2024, and like I said, the January prompt was a book with a snake on the cover, which is such a fun prompt, I think. So I picked this one up, I started reading it, I'm about over a third, a little less than halfway through. This story follows Cedar, who is of Native American descent, but she was adopted by a white family, and her adoptive family are like well-educated, intellectual, a little bit hippie-ish, definitely into the idea of having a Native American child, but have always been extremely proactive in her upbringing, have always been extremely open to her being adopted, have always been extremely accepting and inviting of what Cedar wants to do. In kind of a rebellion, Cedar ends up becoming a Christian and a Catholic and working for a like church newsletter / magazine and doing other things that like normal teenage rebellion kind of entails. But she has a really good relationship with who she considers her mother and father, who are her adoptive parents. When Cedar is like a teenager, her mother gives her a letter from her birth mom, and although Cedar doesn't want to upset her adoptive mom by saying she read it, she has read it. Right at the beginning of this book, we see Cedar finally going, many years later after reading that letter, to meet her birth mom on the reservation. Her birth mom's name is Mary, and she sees this as a little bit of like a sign that the religious path that Cedar has taken is like meant to be. The reason that Cedar is going to see her birth mom and to meet her Native American family is that she's pregnant. She hasn't told her adoptive family yet, and one of the reasons that she hasn't told them is, as we learn in the very beginning of this book, something is going on with the world. There's news reports, there's something happening that is in the form of like a pandemic or in the form of a global sickness or possibly environmental problem. Like, you're never, well, at least halfway through, you're never fully explained what this pandemic, what this incident that's going on in the world is. But one of the things that you are told about is that they are really concerned about pregnancy at this time. You find out right away that like the pregnancy rate has gone way down, that the loss of pregnancy has gone way up, that the pregnancy of male babies has gone way down, so they're mostly female babies. And you also hear all about how animals all over the world, all over the globe, are having this problem as well, and that some of the animals are not reproducing in the way that's normal. So that's something that you know basically from the beginning of the book. Cedar keeps her pregnancy a secret as much as possible, but now she is connected with her family on the reservation. She goes home, she gathers supplies for this pandemic, this global epidemic, this global issue that's happening, and we kind of read on from there. So I don't want to give too much away because it's not a lot is like told to you, and little things kind of come out in drips and drabs that I haven't fully understood yet. I'm enjoying it. It's all told in diary form. Cedar is writing to her unborn child. So you're getting, you know, every day a little snippet or sometimes a long thing of what might happen. Like when Cedar visits the reservation, it's quite a long passage in the diary that she writes to her unborn child. And halfway through, I really don't know what's going to happen. Cedar is definitely showing now. She's definitely obviously pregnant. She's had a couple of scares with people possibly discovering that she's pregnant, and she's been staying in her house with help from other people for a very long time. So she's starting to go a little stir crazy at the part that I'm at now, and she and the people that she's with are kind of deciding to maybe make a dash for it and try to escape her current circumstance. So I'm super interested to see what happens. I like the writing style. It's very plain. It's very matter of fact. Obviously, there's weird things going on. So far, I'm enjoying it. My first Louise Savidge. This book I'm reading physically. The November 2023 prompt, The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, I'm reading on audio. So I'm about a quarter of the way through. I'm on page 112. I luckily have a physical copy of this one, so I'm reading it on audio. I got the audio from my library, but I'm also kind of going through and reading along at certain points. I've only ever read one other Edith Wharton book before, and that was Ethan Frome. I really, really enjoyed that one. It's super short, it's very twisty, it's very depressing, and this one feels very, very different. That one felt modern, but let's say contemporary. I mean, it's definitely a modern classic, so it's modern in the sense that it was written in the early 20th century, but it felt like you could transpose it to almost any time. This feels like a classic. The Age of Innocence is about a young man, Newland Archer, who is in the aristocracy and the upper class of New York society. So this takes place all in Manhattan so far, and it's all about the class distinctions in Manhattan at this time, which is like the late 1800s, how those class distinctions and how Manhattan society and New York society and upper class differ from English society or European society. It's all about the morals and mores of that society and that class, and how our main character Newland really reveres that and really leans into it and respects it, and how he wants to marry May Welland, who is like his sweetheart. And he loves May Welland because she also understands those morals, mores, and ideals of this particular time period and of their class. So he's really excited to marry her. He wants to push the wedding up. He wants to let everybody know that they're engaged, which he plans to do in a very societal, political way. But when May Welland's kind of disgraced cousin comes into town, the Countess Olenska, those plans change because Ellen is, like I said, a little bit disgraced. She's European. She had visited Manhattan society and had been part of Manhattan society for a small period of time when she was younger, but then she went off kind of gallivanting and met her husband, the Count. Now there's kind of scandal following her as she leaves her husband and comes back to New York to live with her cousins, the Wellens. Although Newland is like very opposed to the scandal and to the stir that Ellen is calling, he decides that the best thing to do is like move up the announcement of his engagement to May and to kind of take Ellen under their wing and under the family's wing to avoid, like they can't avoid them being part of the scandal, but they can like minimize the scandal by accepting her as family and trying to integrate her into their society as quickly as possible and as smoothly as possible. He definitely starts to find this difficult, especially when Ellen decides that she's going to divorce the Count, divorce her husband, which is very much frowned upon in his upper class New York society. So this book, very different from Ethan Frome, reads very much like a classic, which I don't love. I don't love classics. I've never read Jane Austen. I've never read the Brontes. I'm not really into that. I think the saving grace of this book for me is that it's all set in New York and that I know Edith Wharton has a deep connection to New York and that I know she doesn't necessarily always write like this. And I think she writes really interesting things. Like for instance, Newland is very much into women's rights and very much feels that there should be equity between women and men. So even though he loves his betrothed for being contrite and sweet and making sure that she stays within societal norms, he wants her to be individual and independent. He wants her to learn and be educated, but he's also kind of a dick. So it's hard to tell how much of that he thinks intellectually but doesn't fully believe, or when push comes to shove, he's not going to adhere to, and he will end up falling back on those societal norms that he is so fond of. I don't know, it's interesting. I want to find out what happens. There's obviously a connection happening with Newland and Ellen, the disgraced cousin. So are they going to get into a relationship? I'm not sure. I have seen this movie many years ago, but I don't really remember it. So this is one that I would like to revisit once I finished reading this. I'm enjoying the narrator, and I also have House of Mirth by Edith Wharton, so I'm interested to read more of her because I do really like her writing style. Like, even though this is classic, I'm not finding it like difficult to follow. I mean, some parts yes, because there's a lot of characters, like side characters that come in from society. There's a lot of people who have opinions about Ellen. She's been hanging out with a guy from society that should kind of know better than hang out with her, and so everybody's buzzing about her like taking walks in the street with this man, and I think this man might be engaged, so you're kind of like wondering what's going on there, and is Ellen promiscuous? Is she pushing that, or is she just European and she doesn't know any better because Europeans do things differently? I think it's interesting so far. It's not my favorite. I definitely preferred Ethan Frome at this point, but we'll see what happens. I feel like it is going to be a little bit scandalous, so we'll see if that drama is enticing to me or turns me off from this book. That is where I'm at with The Age of Innocence, and that is where I'm at with Future Home of the Living God. So when I read some more of one or both of these, I will come back to you and let you know. Let me know if you're participating in the Savidge Prompts for 2024. Let me know if you participated in 2023. If you did, what was your favorite book from 2023? Finished both books that I was reading. The first book that I finished was actually The Age of Innocence. I finished this back in the end of January. This is the second Edith Wharton that I've read, and I did really like it. It's only been like a week since I finished it, and I'm already like don't remember every detail of this book anymore. I think it was a little too classic for me. I think it was a little too much in line with Victorian and Edwardian writing, and a little bit too much of that classic voice, but it was really interesting, and the kind of commentary on, especially written from a male main character's perspective, the commentary on falling in line with your life, like knowing life should be different, that women should have rights, that society should be different, that people should be equal, but because it's more difficult to seek that out, because it's more difficult to voice those opinions, because you feel like you are constantly against the tide of society, how you just kind of fall in line with those ideals and perspectives even if you don't truly believe them. So this definitely has a lot about that, and how our main character has ideals that don't align with his place in society, and how he wants more, how he wants love and adventure and excitement, how he wants in a spouse someone who is truly his equal and who he can rely on to be a creative and intelligent counterpart to his own mind, his own ideas, his own thoughts, his own feelings. He didn't break the mold. He didn't do the thing that could have catapulted him into a different level. Given the chance again, he will make the same decisions. So it was interesting. It was definitely very classic. I look forward to reading more of Edith Wharton's work. I have The House of Mirth, and I have a feeling that it's going to be like very similar to this, although that I think has a female main character, in that it's like looking at society, looking at Manhattan and the New York elite, looking at the upper class and how they treat the lower class, looking at even people of that stature who think that's incorrect, are not willing to do anything to change that because they are comfortable in their position, because they are not willing to rock the boat, etc., etc. I think that Edith Wharton's books probably follow very similar themes, a lot of the books. And that is partly what Ethan Frome is about, that idea of taking risks, taking chances, possibly losing it all for love, and the ultimate negative consequences that that usually entails and that usually happen with trying to break the mold, trying to be different, trying to do something for love's sake. Ethan Frome just felt much more modern and much more accessible. This felt a little bit tough. I wonder if The House of Mirth, which I think was written in between these two, where that lies. Does it feel more modern or does it feel more classic? The next book that I finished for this vlog is Future Home of the Living God. So this book was so bleak. This book is a pandemic global catastrophe novel, and we follow our main character Cedar. She's pregnant. She's really introspective about this and really going out on a limb, even risking her safety and her child's safety because of this global pandemic, because of these strange things that are happening around the planet, and how it becomes very obvious throughout this novel that something that started as like a small worry is going to change how society works and everything about life in America and all over the world as Cedar knows it. Because she so strongly feels that her pregnancy is going to work out, even at a time when other pregnancies don't, because she so strongly feels love for her unborn child, because she so strongly feels the need to have this child, she makes certain decisions and certain things happen. And as we see the political and social aspects of the world decline, people are getting rounded up, people are getting taken to hospitals and prisons and being detained and held, especially pregnant women. We see like how Cedar navigates this world. So it's very, very bleak. I think it's worth going in with like not that much information, because information is given to you and circumstance of what's going on in the rest of the world is given to you in very like drips and drabs, small pieces, small bite-size bits of information you're learning as Cedar's learning. Sometimes Cedar doesn't understand a thing until someone else tells her, and you feel the same way as the reader. This is an epistolary novel, and it's all told as a diary to her unborn child. So Cedar is writing to her baby, and that's like we're learning things as she learns them. So each day new things happen and she writes them in the diary. It's super depressing. It took me kind of a long time to read because of that. I definitely didn't read it in big chunks. I read it in like 10 to 20 page chunks, two diary entries at a time, because it was was depressing. And the longer that you read, the more you don't know what's going to happen to Cedar, and the shorter the rest of the book is, the remaining portion of the book, so you really don't know how it's going to wrap up. I really didn't know what was going to happen to Cedar, what was going to happen to the baby, and I think that's kind of the point. I did really enjoy the writing in this one. I don't know if I really loved this book per se, but I did really enjoy the writing, and I am excited to read more from Louise Savidge, which is a good thing because I have quite a few more Louise Savidge books to read. I've picked up a bunch. But now I feel confident that when I see her work in Little Free Libraries or I see her work at used book sales, I will continue to pick up her work because I did enjoy it and I will read more from her. This was the November book. This was the January book. It is now February and I want to read one more book for this vlog. I could read the December read, which is a book with weather words in the title. I could read the bonus 2023 read. I do want to finish all the prompts for 2023 as well as moving on to 2024, so I could move on to February of 2024. Off the top of my head, I cannot think of any books that fit into either of those prompts, but I am working on my library today and I am moving books around, so I will have an opportunity to look at a lot of books. So I think I will come back to you when I have picked the third book for this vlog. If you can think of any books with weather words, if you can think of any books with mother-son relationships, definitely leave them in the comments down below because maybe I read one and not the other and I'll need it for the next vlog. I was going to do the prompt for December of 2023 in the end of this video, so I looked through all my books. I was looking for the bonus prompt too, so the prompt for December was to read a book with weather words. I do have Weather by Jenny Awful, but I was trying not to read that one because it's a little bit of a cop-out, so I was like, I must be able to find another weather word book. I did find What Storm, What Thunder by Miriam J.A. Chansey, which is a, I think, partly historical fiction and partly current day contemporary modern novel which follows the events of the most recent horrific earthquake in Haiti that was very destructive and terrible. I think that happened a few years ago. Honestly, my sense of time is so messed up, mostly from the pandemic, that I don't know if that happened in 2020 or if it happened in 2017. I can't remember. I'm not sure. I'm sure in the book I will know once I start reading it. So I got this at a used book sale recently and I am excited to get to this one. But when I was thinking about it and when I was looking at the Savidge Prompts, I realized that I'm already reading a book that fits into the February 2024 prompt, which is a book that is a retelling of a myth, a fairy tale, or another book. So I am currently reading The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Lavelle, and this is a pretty short novella about Charles Thomas Tester, who lives in Harlem and does some odd jobs. This book is based on The Horror of Red Hook by H.P. Lovecraft, and last year I read The Horror of Red Hook by Lovecraft. It's a very short story, and it is probably the most blatantly and obviously racist book I've ever read, like super discriminatory against foreigners and against people of color, and basically saying that all evil stems from immigrants, and it was like extremely difficult to read, and a little bit I blocked out some of it. I don't fully 100% remember it, but I knew that I really wanted to read Black Tom, and I found this book late last year at my local used bookstore, so I was super excited to find it and I decided to read it. I am 3/4 of the way through already. I haven't been reading this one super fast just because I have been reading a bunch of other books at the same time and I've kind of been reading this one in between. This is a book that you could probably get through in a day or two if you really tried, but it's taken me quite a few days. But I'm kind of happy that it has because now I can use it for this vlog. So The Horror of Red Hook by H.P. Lovecraft is about a cop who works in Red Hook, Brooklyn. When the story starts, he's taking a break in Rhode Island because his last case in Brooklyn was so traumatic and upsetting to him that he needs to like go to a mental institute and like take a mental break. He's telling us this story from there about his last case, which was all about the occult and like baby eaters and very bad things, the destruction of the world through occult nature, but all like stemming from immigrants and people of color and stemming from the evil that comes from that. So one particular person has kind of harnessed that evil and is using it, a kind of mob guy, a bad guy who has taken over a whole housing development, a whole low-income housing projects in Red Hook. Red Hook is known for housing projects because they made a bunch of housing projects there because they thought that that would be a horrible place to be able to shuttle people off to and not really think about the immigrants and the low-income people and the people of color, and they could just stick them into Red Hook. Of course, nowadays Red Hook is like very fancy and there's a big supermarket there and everybody loves it. But anyway, our main cop character in The Horror of Red Hook kind of is the person who figures out what's going on in this housing development and the evil that is happening there, and he kind of brings in the whole police force and makes sure that this is stopped before it gets too far. Whatever these occult, magical, horrible things that are going on, he kind of stops. It's all a little vague, and it definitely, because it's told by someone who like had a mental breakdown, a lot of it you're not 100% sure of. If I recall correctly, in that story, there's a little bit of an ambiguous ending, like maybe seeds of evil have dispersed throughout the wind and throughout New York to possibly take root again. In The Ballad of Black Tom, we meet Charles Thomas Tester, and he is a kind of a con man in Harlem. He lives with his aging father, and he does like odd jobs and odd cons and finds things and gets into places that other people can't necessarily get into. For instance, when we first meet him, he is taking a book out to Flushing, Queens, and he's delivering it to this scary older woman who lives alone and won't let anyone into her house. We can tell from the way that Thomas talks about her and the way that she's described that she is involved in the occult, and the task that she has set him is not on the up and up. It's not for good reasons, and she is definitely someone to be wary of and be scared of. So Thomas knows this, he does this task where he gets paid, he's super happy about it, but he has a little secret. He's kept something back from what she wanted because he knows that giving her the full power of what she's asked for could be extremely dangerous. So Thomas does jobs like that, and he does those things because he's like a 20-year-old black man in Harlem, and it's hard for him to make a living for he and his father. One of the ways that he solicits his jobs is by kind of strumming and playing the guitar, busking in various places in New York, and he is busking one day looking for his next job, and a white gentleman stops him and he kind of says like, "Oh, I know what you are. I need your help. Will you come play at this party for me?" So the man offers Thomas a really big amount of money for him, and so he knows that he can't not take the job, even though he sees red flags for this white guy, and also even though as soon as the white man leaves his presence, 2 cops come up to Thomas, which of course he doesn't want that kind of attraction. So Thomas does decide to take this job with this red flag guy, and that's kind of where the book takes off from there. That is probably, you know, at least a quarter of the way into the book because it's so short, but I think that's a good amount to know going into this book. Did that sound like the first story that I described to you? No, not really. And I think that that's one of the things about this book that's interesting is it's not immediately apparent or super obvious or super overt, the connections to The Horror at Red Hook. I think if I had read The Horror at Red Hook immediately beforehand, I might have remembered characters' names from that story and therefore made connections quicker than I have have while reading the Ballad of Black Tom, but I'm okay with that. Like, it's fine not to know, and this is certainly a fine book. You don't need to read The Horror at Red Hook before reading this. Now that I'm 3/4 of the way through Black Tom, I'm definitely seeing connections. Things are coming back to me from The Horror at Red Hook that I'm remembering more, so I'm definitely like grasping how the two stories are connected a little bit more. So I think it's really interesting. I also think it's super interesting that Victor LaValle would choose to write a version of a story that was so incredibly racist and ridiculous. So I'm excited to find out what happens with this and see how I like the ending. So when I read that, I will definitely come back to you, and then I will go over all the books that I read for this installment of a Savidge Prompts vlog. I have finished Black Tom and I really enjoyed it. It is told in two parts. So the first part is Charles Thomas Tester's part, which is connected to The Horror at Red Hook, but not necessarily directly a retelling of it. And then the second part is told from a cop's perspective, who is the main character in The Horror at Red Hook. So that one correlates much more directly with that story. And I think it was just a really interesting choice for Victor LaValle to choose to retell that story. I think the way that he went about it was really intriguing and interesting. I loved the graphic depictions of New York. It reminded me a little bit of like some of the other more classic books that I've read about New York recently, like A Rage in Harlem, just like going on different trains and the different locations in New York. I loved that. I loved the depiction of Red Hook and the horror at Red Hook and how horrific that whole kind of final conclusion to the story is. But then the end of the story is actually the more horrific part, kind of the denouement and the revelation at the end of the story is the part that is going to live, you know, in your memory and you're going to think about, and it's going to be a much deeper exploration of horror in a way. So I really did enjoy it. I'm super glad that I read it. I'm super glad that I finally read a Victor LaValle. I can't wait to read more. And this fulfills the prompt of a retelling or reimagining as the February prompt. So that's awesome. So in this video, I've read the January 2024 Savidge prompt, which was to read a book with a snake on the cover. And then I read the February 2024 prompt, which was to read a retelling or reimagining of a myth, story, fairy tale, book, etc. And then I also read one of the oldest books on my TBR. It's over there, so I'm not going to grab it, but it was The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, which I think is very fitting. Actually, I didn't say this earlier, but I know that Simon Savidge really likes Edith Wharton, so I feel like that was doubly a good choice on my part. It definitely got one of the older books on my TBR out, read, onto my read shelf, and also it's a book that I think Simon Savidge would like. And I mentioned earlier that I might read What Storm, What Thunder for the December 2023 prompt, and then I also have to read a book featuring a mother-son relationship to like button up and finish up the prompts for 2023. And the other day I found a book. The next vlog that you see will probably be the December 2023 prompt, which is featuring weather words, the bonus 2023 prompt, which is featuring a mother-son relationship, and then hopefully I'll get to March's, which I don't remember what March's prompt is. Let me know if you are participating in the Savidge prompts. Let me know what books you've read for the prompts so far in 2024. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!